Okay, so we're picking up with Elizabeth I and her rule as queen. Now, Elizabeth, as she was growing up, she was very well liked by her sister Mary until Mary becomes queen. At the time that Mary becomes queen, Elizabeth is seen as competition. She's a threat, and Elizabeth actually poses two threats to Mary because, first off, she's Protestant while Mary was Catholic, and Elizabeth is very popular. She has just the right personality. She had her father's personality, where she was very friendly with people, and people just tended to love her. Mary, not so much. Being a very pious and devout Catholic, she was much more restrained and reserved and didn't really let people get close to her. So Elizabeth is seen as a threat to Mary when she becomes queen. 6 months after Mary becomes queen, a plot to assassinate her is discovered, and Mary truly believed that Elizabeth was involved, even though there was no proof that she was. She really believed that Elizabeth was involved in this plot to kill her, and so now she doesn't trust her, as well as seeing her as a threat. And so she is going to have Elizabeth arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London for 2 months. Now, this is not usually a good thing because people who went to the Tower of London tended to die there. So it was a kind of a stressful time for Elizabeth. So she was a little worried about the outcome. In May, soldiers are going to be ordered to remove Elizabeth to the Queen's Manor House in a small town called Woodstock. Elizabeth thought that this presented a really good opportunity where she might be murdered on the way there, because that would be convenient, and it'd be a way that Mary could not be blamed for it. But she does actually arrive in Woodstock unharmed. But this unjust imprisonment of her actually makes her even more popular among the English people. So that kind of backfires on Mary to some extent. The crowds are going to turn out on her way just to greet her on her journey, just to see her and to touch her clothing, or to touch her horse or her litter or whatever. Yeah, it just makes her much more popular. During her confinement at Woodstock, she was housed in the gatehouse. She wasn't even housed in the actual manor house. She was housed in the gatehouse, which is like this entry house kind of thing. Very shabby condition. There was only 4 rooms that actually were livable. She had new servants. She wasn't allowed to keep any of her old servants. All of her new servants were loyal to Mary. She was not allowed to talk to strangers without having a guard present. She was allowed no paper, no ink, no pen in order for her to write secret messages. Remember, Mary was thinking that she was part of that plot against her, so she's not going to give her any means to communicate and maybe get another plot going. Any books that were sent to Elizabeth were sent to the Queen first in order to be searched for any secret messages or secret letters hidden inside. And so Elizabeth is actually going to stay at Woodstock for nearly a year, and then after a year's up, Mary sort of forgives her and allows her to return to court. However, Elizabeth, being kind of smart about it, says, I'm not going to be at court where you can just accuse me of something that I probably am not going to be doing. And so she decides to go to the country until Mary dies. So she's out in the country where she's not going to get into trouble. She stays out of the city. And then she hears of Mary's death. On Mary's death, Elizabeth becomes queen. And as queen, she decides that she's going to have a policy of religious compromise, that she is not going to be so dominant and bloodthirsty as her sister was. And so she is going to enforce reforms that she felt both the Protestants and the Catholics would accept. So she's not just going to gung-ho it for one side. She actually tries to work both sides. However, she would attack anyone of either faith if they defied her orders. So she is kind of uncompromising in that way, that her word was final, and if you didn't like it, too bad. She doesn't care if you're Protestant or Catholic. She's still going to go after you. You do what she says. But she does make some changes to the Anglican Church as she becomes queen. English is going to replace Latin in the church services. A lot of the pomp and ceremony is going to be retained, like the color of the robes that the clergy wore, and the altar and what that looked like, and what was said in the ceremony. That will all stay. The hierarchy of the bishops and the archbishops is kept. But the monarch is still the head of the church, not the pope, and England was still a Protestant nation. And so that is how Elizabeth sort of forms England as the Protestant nation that it kind of is today. Well, with all this reform happening, the Catholic Church kind of at this point wakes up and says, wait a minute, people aren't happy with us because they keep leaving us. So what if we try and change our church? Not completely, not changing it the way the Protestants want it, but maybe we do need to examine some of the things that they have problems with. So Pope Paul III is going to be the leader of this reform of the Catholic Church, and he wants to revive the moral authority of the church, that they are the final say in Christianity, and people need to realize that. So he calls together the Council of Trent, and it's a meeting of bishops and cardinals and people in the upper hierarchy of the religion. And this Council of Trent actually meets several times. In fact, it meets off and on for 20 years. And what they're doing is they're coming together and they're trying to figure out, okay, what do we need to do? What changes do we need to make? Are we upholding our end? And that kind of thing. So what it does is it reaffirms the traditional Catholic views of the church. And that is that salvation comes through faith and good works. Remember, that's different from Martin Luther and John Calvin. That salvation comes through faith and good works. You have to do both. That the Bible is a major source of religious truth, but it's not the only source of religious truth. That there are other things that you can consult, like bishops and cardinals and popes and archbishops and priests and monks and nuns and all kinds of stuff that you could go to for additional resources on what Christianity is about. They also are going to have stiff penalties for worldliness and corruption among the clergy. Remember, that was one of the concerns of the people, was that the church was getting too powerful and too rich and too lazy. And so they're going to punish those that fall in those categories. And then they're also going to create new schools that would better educate the clergy, because they felt, well, maybe our clergy just aren't knowledgeable enough, they're not educated enough to fight back with arguments of our own. Maybe that's why people left, because we weren't arguing these points. We didn't have the knowledge or the ability, or the people with the knowledge and the ability to argue these points. So that's what they are doing. They're trying to reform the Catholic Church a little bit here and there, and try and tighten up the laces to make it so they're not seen as being corrupt or too worldly by the average person. Another thing that the church is going to do is it's going to create the Inquisition. Now, this is a church court that was set up during the Middle Ages, so it's not anything really new, but it was set up in the Middle Ages to root out heresies. Now, Pope Paul is going to strengthen it, give it more power, I guess, or more ability to do things. For example, it uses secret testimony. Like if you thought you saw something, you could testify to it, but nobody else had to know that you were testifying. It could use torture, it could use execution in order to stamp out heresies. And remember, heresies are teachings that differ from the Bible, differ from the Catholic teachings. And so the Inquisition is going to put together something called the Index of Forbidden Books, that this is a list of works that were considered too immoral or not religious enough for Catholics to read. And that included books by Martin Luther and books by John Calvin. And so they didn't want them, encountering these ideas. They might lead you away from the Catholic Church. Another group that will be established under this is the Jesuits, or the Society of Jesus, which was created by Ignatius of Loyola. And this is a new religious order that will be recognized by the Pope. And like I said, it's the Society of Jesus, and they are commonly known as the Jesuits. Now, this was founded by Ignatius. It was designed to combat heresy, so to go against teachings that differed from the Catholic Church, and to spread Catholicism. So, who's Ignatius? Well, Ignatius is a Spanish knight who was injured in the Crusades, So he had gone and fought and came back alive but injured. And he has a lot of pain from his injuries. So he eventually is going to seek solace from this pain in the church. And he becomes a soldier of God. And through divine inspiration, he puts together this program. And his program is very much founded on spiritual and moral discipline and very rigorous religious training and absolute obedience to the church. So if the church sent you out to do something, you were expected to do it. But many Jesuits are going to serve as advisors to Catholic rulers, so Catholic kings and queens. And so they advise them on policy. The Jesuits will also set up schools in order to teach the Jesuit faith. So trying to teach not just the Jesuit faith, but Jesuit is a part of the Catholic faith, so teaching that as well. And also they are going to become missionaries, and they are going to go to Asia and Africa and eventually to the Americas to spread the Catholic faith. Another reformer of the Catholic Church is Teresa of Avila, and eventually she'll become Saint Teresa of Avila. She was the daughter of a well-to-do Spanish noble family. Remember, the Spaniards are very, very Catholic. Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's wife, Catholic. So is Teresa. So she is the daughter of a well-to-do Spanish noble family, and she enters the convent at a very young age, which many girls that entered the convent do so at a very young age, like 12 or 13. But Teresa wasn't happy with her convent. She felt that it was not strict enough for her. And so she sets up her own order of nuns. So she, when she gets old enough, she sets up her own convent. And they lived in isolation. They ate and they slept very little. They dedicated their days to prayer and meditation. Well, the Catholic Church is very impressed by Teresa, and they will ask her to set up similar convents and monasteries throughout Spain. And she is going to be very widely honored for her work at these reforms, or this Reformation that's going to help make the church better. And so after her death, that's when she will be made a saint. So Catholic Church finally woke up and said, maybe we need to make some tweaks and changes and make ourselves back to where our original idea of what the Catholic or Christian faith should be. And the results of the Reformation. Did the Catholic Reformation work? Well, Rome, the city, was a more pious city. It was much more religious than it had been before the Catholic Reformation. Piety and charity and religious art are going to flourish as a result of the Catholic Reformation. But did it work? Not maybe, maybe not. I mean, you still had Protestant groups, and there were still more Protestant groups forming, so people were still unhappy with what the church was doing. It wasn't a complete fix, but it was kind of a band-aid on the problem. We will see widespread persecution on all sides. Both Catholics and Protestants are intolerant of each other. They're intolerant of other groups. They persecute religious sects like the Anabaptists. You have the Catholics going against the Lutherans, and the Lutherans against the Calvinists, and the Calvinists against the Anabaptists. It's just an ongoing process that just doesn't seem to end. And eventually we see the height of it in the witch hunts that will take place during this Reformation period. Religious fervor or fever is going to contribute to this. The fact that people were so caught up in their religion is what's going to lead to these witch hunts. You were accused of being a witch or an agent of the devil if people were unhappy with you. And usually it was women, but sometimes men were also accused of being warlocks, possibly. But tens of thousands of women and men are going to die in these witch hunts just because of religious hatred. And there's various reasons for this. Most people still believed in magic and spirits at this time. And I mean, it's something that the Catholic Church was trying to get rid of, but they weren't always that successful at it. And so it's kind of this head-on collision between magic and the Catholic faith, and so the Catholic faith kind of labeled any idea of magic is heresy, and so it's a teaching that goes against the Bible, so we have to stamp it out, even though it could be something harmless, like getting rid of your sneezes or something like that. Also, the people that were hunted down, those women that were hunted down for the witch hunts, they were seen as scapegoats for troubled times. Anytime something went bad, bad crop year, or taxes went up, or there's a war that broke out, or a disease came through your town, whatever, you were looking for somebody to blame. So you went out of your way to find people that didn't fit, that you wanted to get rid of anyway, that were different from you. So that's how you found them. You found them as scapegoats. They also, social outcasts are going to be targeted as well, like beggars, people who don't quite fit into society, poor widows. You know, they don't have a husband, and maybe all their children are gone or whatever. They don't have much money. Midwives, women who attended the births of children. You know, if the baby dies in childbirth, the midwife would get blamed, even though she may have had nothing to do with it. So most religious centers of conflict are going to have a lot of victims of the witch hunts because they're easy targets. Anybody of the opposite faith is anywhere that there's turmoil over religion, like Germany or Switzerland or France or England, that's where you're going to see a lot of your witch hunts taking place.